everyone, it's Lisa from My Dreaming Soap. Welcome to my channel, thanks for dropping by. I thought this week I'd do something a little bit different. Now, this is a video that I've kind of put off doing for ages. It's something I get asked for ever such a lot, but because the vast majority of my audience are not in the UK, I've never really got round to do it. But having done a few sorts of things like this in the past, I know a lot of people said it's actually quite interesting to see the types of things in the UK that we have to do when we make soap to be legal to actually sell it. So this video isn't about all of our regulations here, it's just about one specific part. Now, when we make soap in the UK, I'm sure if you've watched my channel quite a bit, you'll know we're quite heavily regulated. We have to have all of our soap assessed by a cosmetic assessor. So basically our recipe has to be approved. We have to keep PIF files, product information files, for every single batch of product that we make. We have quite detailed labelling regulations. We do have to put all of our allergens. We have got very strict rules about what has to go on a label. And lastly, and what this video is actually about, is that we have to upload every cosmetic product that we make onto a database that is searchable by people like trading standards, doctors, or anyone if there's any sort of emergency with a product that you've supplied. And if you don't do these things, then it's quite serious consequences. You can have quite a serious fine, or you could even be imprisoned. As I said, I've been asked quite a lot to make a video on uploading things onto our cosmetic database, our cosmetic portal. So that's what this is going to be about. Now, there's not a huge amount of guidance around about using this portal. So this video is literally about what I do and how I go about doing it. And I've researched as much as I can, and I'm pretty happy with the way that I do it. And hopefully I can give you some hints and tips if you're struggling with it yourself. But really it's from me, a person that uses it quite a lot and has done quite a lot of investigation and research into how things should be done. But I'm not saying this is exactly guaranteed perfectly how you should be doing it. And unfortunately there is no official tutorial or official guidance out there to show us all, so we kind of all have to try and work it out for ourselves. Okay, should we get started then? So let's start having a look at how we put these products on the portal. So I'm at the Submit Cosmetic Product Notification page. I'm going to carry on calling it the portal. It's not really what we call it nowadays, but it's easier than me keep saying all that, isn't it? Now, we do have a specific portal for us in Great Britain. I'll try not to say UK. It is specifically Great Britain. If I trip into UK every now and again, then just bear with me. We also have a very similar thing in Europe. Okay, since Brexit, we've got our own portal. So anyone who's in Europe but outside Great Britain would need to use the EU portal, which is the original one. And this applies to any products made available for people to buy in Great Britain. And as you can see on the screen, we need to notify the Office for Product Safety and Standards about every cosmetic product available to consumers in Great Britain. And that would be the same for the European portal as well. So therefore, if you're a soap maker and maybe you're not in Europe or Great Britain, for you to legally sell soap into the UK and let people buy soap off your website, you would need to register your products on this portal. If you're not doing so, but you are still selling soap to the UK, even though your website is overseas, you're still making your soap available to the UK by allowing shipping to Europe and Great Britain, you would need to register them on this portal. Now the problem with that is you can only get an account to register on the portal if you have a postcode or a zip code, you may call it, in the relevant area. So therefore, if you don't live in Great Britain or you don't have someone who would act as a responsible party for you, then it's actually illegal for soap or any other cosmetics to be sold into Europe or Great Britain. And it's serious if you don't do this. As you can see, we've got here, you may face a fine and a prison term of up to 3 months if you do not notify OPSS about a cosmetic product. Okay. So therefore it is important that if you are selling it into Europe or the UK, these rules would potentially affect you as well. So what is a cosmetic product? Again, this is something where we have differences depending on what area of the world you're in. For us, basically a cosmetic product, I'm just going into the regulations here. You can see here, we're looking at something that it has a function in relation to the external parts of the body. So we're expecting it to be in contact or used with a purpose on the human body. So therefore, as you can see, to clean, to perfume, all of that sort of stuff. And the parts of the human body, essentially, it's the external parts. So our face, our hair, our teeth. You might say, well, your teeth aren't external. They sort of are. They're there on the outside. We're not talking about products that you ingest like tablets or anything. Okay, so that's what our cosmetic products are. Let's go through and have a look at how we put something on this portal now. It's actually one of those things that once you've done it a few times, then you get very used to doing it, and it's a lot quicker than it may initially seem, because there's quite a few questions that look pretty scary, but once you know how to answer them, then it's much more straightforward. Now, what I'm going to do first of all is I'm going to go through this in a fairly basic way, just answering the questions and not going too much into detail with them. There's a particular part where we have to enter what we call our formulations that can get quite complicated, and people really struggle with that. So what I will do is I will then come back and go over that in more detail to try and give some help with those formulations that you may be needing to upload. Right, come on then, let's create a new product, shall we? So as you can see, we're on this is my actual cosmetic portal page. So I'm going to go in and create a new product. There is this help with adding a product, but to be honest, there's not much info in there. Right, let's have a look. So we've got 3 tasks to complete, and you have to do them in order. You can't jump onto task 3 before you've done the other bit. So I guess that's a safety feature to make sure you put everything in properly. So first of all, we need to create our product. Let's go and do that. Now I'm just going to make up a product, okay, and then delete it afterwards. So I'm not going to put on a proper product. So first of all, let's put in our product name that we've got. So I might have super duper bubbles. Okay, I'm going to call it that. Now, if it's not obvious that what the product is, so you might think super duper bubbles, is that a bath bomb, is that, you know, some sort of liquid soap or bubble bath or whatever. We do need to just make it clear and go comma, because it's not part of what's actually on our label, and then we put in what product it is. If it was obvious, if yours was actually called super duper soap, then you wouldn't need to go comma soap, because it's obvious, it's soap. Right, so we've got super duper bubbles, that's our soap. Now, an internal reference. I very rarely ever do an internal reference. You may find it useful. It's for you to have a note for whatever reason. So let's say, for example, I've made super duper bubbles before, but because I've changed the label, or maybe I've changed something, anything that you change in a product, whether it's the packaging, the label, an ingredient or whatever, you have to upload the product again. So this might be something like I've said, this is a repeat soap, but I've now put on some new packaging in 2023. So it's just telling me why I've basically put this product on potentially twice really, because I would have had maybe super duper soap last year, but now I've just redone it. Okay, that's just for us. Okay, you don't need to do it. Put a note in there if you want. Don't if you don't. And I, most of the time, don't bother. Okay, so then continue. Is the product intended to be used on children under 3 years old? Now here the word intended is important. So is it a baby product? Now, that doesn't mean it can't be used. So, for example, you might have your super duper soap, which is just a general bar of soap, and people may choose to wash their kids with it. Now, we're not saying they can't do it. It's not unsafe for children, but it's not specifically formulated for child use. And for you to have something that could be used on children under 3 years old, you need to have it specifically assessed for that purpose. Okay, so here with mine, I'm going to go, nope, it's not intended to be used specifically on children under 3 years old. They may use it, but that's not its purpose. Okay, so I'm going to put no for that. Now, nanomaterials. This is where the questions, I think people get a bit freaked out and a bit scared with these. Have I got any nanomaterials in my soap? Goodness me. Well, as you can see here, a nanomaterial is something tiny, really small. And you've got your measurements there. I'm not going to go into the technicalities of this. You've got a bit of help with nanomaterials. Essentially, there can be some problems if you use them in your cosmetic products. They can have adverse effects. So, does Super Duper Bubbles soap contain any nanomaterials? Now, you could say, well, no, it doesn't. I'm always a person who likes to just not go, well, of course it doesn't. You should be pretty safe saying that, but just make sure that generally you are happy that, oh, of course it doesn't, is right. How can you tell? Well, again, if you've got a product that has been assessed, and let's face it, all your products should be assessed if you're going to sell them, even give them out as samples, that counts. You can't give out samples without having them assessed. You can't even give them away to charity without having them assessed. So they should be assessed. Your cosmetic assessor will have assessed the safety. It's a cosmetic product safety report. They would have assessed the safety of your product, and therefore they would have assessed whether there are nanomaterials in that product. And generally, you can presume that if your formula has been passed by the safety assessors, it's very unlikely to have nanomaterials in it. If you're one of those people that goes, bit like me, I don't know if I'm happy, you're just presuming, have a look through your cosmetic assessment. I'm going to bring up just a section of one of mine. So this is a part of one of my cosmetic assessments, and this will be a part B of your assessment, and you'll have a whole load of detail about how they've tested it and the findings and all of that sort of stuff that they've done on your product. And can you see here that we've got a section that says they are happy here that there are no nanomaterials included in this formulation. So we can see in this report for this soap that I'm registering, I know there are no nanomaterials, so I'm happy with ticking no to that box. Okay, so I can do a nice big no there, or a normal size no. Right, is this a multi-item kit? Now, what we mean by a multi-item kit is a product that has to go together. So say, for example, maybe if it was a hair dye, for example, you know those ones where you have part A mixes with part B, you mix it all up and smush it all on, that would be a multi-item kit. A soap is not a multi-item kit. Even if you put, if you were doing like a gift pack and you put 2 soaps together, that wouldn't be a multi-item kit, because to use them you don't mix them together. They're 2 individual items that would need to be registered on the portal individually. So my soap is a single product. Then what we need to do is upload an image of the product label. So you should have already generated your product label. I do all mine in Adobe Illustrator, and then I export them into a PNG file and I save these images. So let me go and grab one. I haven't got one for Super Duper Bubbly Soap, or whatever we called it. So let me just go and grab one. Hang on a second. So I need to upload a file. So I'm going to choose my file. You can do a PNG, a JPEG, whatever. There's my label. And so therefore that label has now been registered on the portal. And the reason for that is obviously if someone has a problem with your product, the hospital or whatever might say, what was it you used? And they go and show them and go, is this soap with penguins in? I didn't like it. It made me go all red. It doesn't do that, by the way. And then they can see the product information on that, and they can trace down this registration that they've got on the system. So there's my label. Now it does say you can either save and continue that or save and upload another image. Now I tend with my soaps not to upload another image because mine's a band that goes all the way around my soaps. But if you have a product that has an image, like for example some of my creams and serums and that I do, it has two labels. It has an image, a label on the top, and then it has a band or something on the bottom. So you may have more than one part of your label, so therefore you'd upload another one at this point. But I've just got the one. I can save and continue that. So the creating my product task has now been finished, which is brilliant. I can now continue. I'm not really sure why we get a little sort of continue bit there, but anyway, that's whoever's designed this portal thing. Right, is the product available in different shades? Now you might think with this, well yes, my soap may be like this and it may have some blue in it and it may have some green in it. Now this will depend on the type of assessment that you've got. If you've got a fixed assessment, it's very likely that you'll be doing the same soap over and over again, so therefore it wouldn't be different at any point. And in that case, if you're doing the same soap over and over again, you only have to register it on the portal once. And typically what you'll find is this is literally meant for things like, for example, something like a lipstick or something. If you're making a soap and it's different because it's got a different mica in, then it's actually a different soap. And you would actually have to register that as a different product. So just the fact that you're making soap and you're doing a different pattern or different colours in, that's a new product. Okay, so every time you upload a soap that's in any way different to what you did before, then it is a different product. So here, our products are not available in different shades, so therefore I can just do a no on that. Now this is a question I think that people get confused about just because of how it's written. So what is the physical form of our product? So as you can see here, there's various options depending on what you might be doing. We're doing a solid bar of soap. So people get confused with this first bit here. Is it a solid or pressed powder? And people think, well, no, my soap isn't a solid pressed powder. What this is saying is it a solid? Or is it a pressed powder? So they're two things. Solid, yes, our soap is solid. Ignore the pressed powder bit for us, okay? People just get confused and think this only relates to powder items, you know, like those compressed eyeshadows and things. No, that's where we need to go for a soap. So in we go for there. Not ticking other, we are solid, okay? We're a solid lump of soap. Next one, what is the product contained in? And again, typically for soap makers, we're going to be this first one. A typical non-pressurized bottle, jar, sachet or other package. So if you wrap in shrink film, if you wrap in wax paper like I do with a band round, put it in a box, those sort of things, you are that first option. Other than that, pressurized container, that would be if you've got like something with a spray in. An impregnated sponge. People do those sponges full of soap now, don't they? White patch pad, that sort of thing, or if it's encapsulated. So if it was something that's in a little capsule. Okay, none of those relate to our soap, so we are the first one. A typical non-pressurized bottle, jar, sachet or other package. So nice and easy. Scary question again. Carcinogenic, mutagenic or reprotoxic substances. Has your soap got any nasty stuff in? Again, we can sort of make the presumption that for us to have a soap that has passed a safety assessment, it wouldn't have any of these products in. But you can go back and check your safety report just to make sure. Back into that section where we looked at those nanomaterials. Look, I've got no irritants, no sensitizers, no CMRs that we were looking at. There's none of those things in this formulation. So again, I've got that certified by my cosmetic assessor that I don't have any of those things in there. So again, I can go in and say, nope, that's not a problem. Okay, so let's just do a no on that one. Categories. What category of cosmetic product is this? Now, what this is trying to do is help you put your thing in the right place. Because if you think about a database, they don't want to just have everything all together, you know, and someone goes, oh my goodness me, this thing has made me come out in a rash, and they've got to search for everything. So it's just grouping stuff together. So for our soap, we are a skin product. Okay, hopefully that's fairly straightforward because it's intended to go on the skin. And remember, with all of these, it's their main purpose. That's what you're looking for. All right, you might say, whoa, hang on, some of it touches the scalp or some of it touches my nails. That's not its purpose. Okay, so what its purpose is, it's a skin product. And then for our soap, we are a skin cleansing product. Be careful with soap. We get very used to ticking the top box. We're not a skin care product. That's things like face creams and hand creams and that sort of things. We're a skin cleansing product. So we can just continue with that. I'm not going to go through the rest. I think they look fairly self-explanatory. And then what category of skin cleansing product is it? Okay, we're a soap. Even though it's got bath and shower products there, you know, we're a soap. That is fairly obvious, isn't it? Okay, so let's grab our soap. Okay, this is where we get all sorts of problems with people just... I've seen so many forums with people just not understanding how to do this section. So this is the bit I'm going to tag a bit on at the end and go through this in more detail. Okay, so how you provide the product formulation. So we have to upload our formulation of our product, what's in our soap. Now, this is always done, just like our labels, on a what the product is now. I think sometimes in other countries they call it the out of the pot formulation rather than an in the pot. So this is out of the pot. So therefore, what is actually there? So we're not going to see things like lye, sodium hydroxide, that sort of stuff in our recipe. It's the saponified state. What is it the customer is actually getting to put on their skin is how we register this. And I say this is the hardest bit. So I'm just going to tell you how to choose, and then we'll look at how we actually do it later on. So do I want to choose a predefined frame formulation? Goodness me, what's that? A frame formulation is literally where they already have some formulas set into this portal that you go, yep, that's my formula, and tick on it. And I'll explain why that could be suitable for you in a minute. Do you want to enter the ingredients and their exact concentrations manually? Do you want to enter the ingredients and their concentration ranges manually? Do you want to upload a CSV file? Right, this is where it goes horribly wrong. Right, frame formulation, we're just going to go in and find the recipe that matches our recipe and tick on that. Okay, nice and easy. Okay, and I'll show you how to do that in a second. What do we mean by exact concentrations and concentration ranges? Exact concentration is literally when you have a product and you have got everything that was in this specific soap. It's all been calculated to produce the after saponification figures, and you're going to list out those exact figures and pop them in. Okay, so this is my exact recipe for this exact product. When we look at ranges, that's when it's saying, well, it could have up to this amount in it, and it could have up to this amount in it, and up to this amount in it. So therefore, this gives a little bit more flexibility. So for example, if you have a cosmetic assessment where you're allowed to make changes, so maybe you're allowed to add fragrance oil or leave the fragrance oil out, can you see how that would change the amounts in your soap? If you did an unfragrant soap, then 100% of it would be actual soapy stuff, wouldn't it? Like the saponified oils, the water, glycerin, that sort of stuff. Whereas if you add fragrance, you're then altering those things. So therefore what you can do is you can do ranges where you could say this could be between two amounts. Now again, this takes a little bit of work. I use ranges quite a lot actually in quite a lot of my soaps that I do, because it just allows me to do few calculations and use them for a number of soaps rather than, you know, doing it every single time, which is a lot of hard work. You have to be quite precise with your ranges. So when they talk about a range, you can't go, it's going to be somewhere between 0 and 100%. They're not going to be happy with that. So you literally want to go, what would be the lowest amount that I would put in, and what would be the highest amount that I would put in. What I'm going to do, I'm going to go straight in and look at the first one, because this is just quick. Okay, because I want to get through the rest of this and then move on to the more how we actually decide on this, because I'm sure some of you are thinking, well, I don't really need to know the detail. So I'm just going to choose, this is the quickest one. I'm going to choose a predefined frame formulation. Just bear with me. I'm just going to click soap. I'm going to tell you when you can do that. I do that a lot. So if you're sitting there going, holy cow, I enter all my stuff and it's hideous, I'll show you when you can use that one. Then, does the product, so we're now off the formulation, we've done it. Didn't have to upload anything. How brilliant is that? Does the product contain ingredients that the National Poisons Information Service needs to know about? For us as soap makers, that tends to be things like essential oils. If you have an essential oil in your soap, it needs to be notified to the NPIS. If you're unsure, you can click on this link and it will tell you all the types of things that would need to be notified. I would advise you go through there and have a look and just make sure you don't think any of that is in your soap, or just be aware of what is potentially in your soap. So for example here, I know I make soap, not all the time, but with essential oils in. So therefore any essential oil needs to be notified. A lot of these other stuff I don't factor in at all, so I don't worry about them. Okay, so as far as I'm concerned, this super duper bubbly soap, I've just made it with fragrance oil. It doesn't have any of those essential oils in or anything. Again, check your fragrance oil in case it's an essential oil blend or something. So I can just say no and then continue. Now, there is some debate on whether we have to tell them about fragrance oils and everything. I don't. I know some people will say, well, surely if you do essential oils, you should tell them about fragrance oils. The reason why I don't is because with the fragrance oils, they're not actually essential oils. And also as well, bearing in mind with this, you have already provided them with a copy of your product label. And on your product label, it says there's parfum in there, so fragrance oil. And also on our labels, we have listed out all of the reportable allergens that would be in that fragrance oil. So they already have information about allergens and things in there. And when you do this NPIS reporting thing, it doesn't give many more detail than that. It just goes, I've got orange essential oil in there or something, and that's it. Okay, so I feel I'm quite happy with that. And if I get told to do it differently, then certainly I will. But I feel I'm not missing out by not putting and trying to break down a fragrance oil and telling them about it. So that's my argument for doing it like that. So my task has now been completed. I can now go to the next bit. And so this is where I just submit and review. So I get a number. So as you can see, you can now check through this. I've got my Super Duper Bubble soap. It's an internal reference to me. Said it was not for children under 3. It's a single item. It's not a multi-part kit. I added a label. Now normally obviously my label would be my Super Duper Bubble label. I haven't actually made one for a fake soap. And so then you've got all this information about everything that I entered. I did the formulation as a frame formulation and I used toilet soap for mine. So when I'm happy with that, what I would then do is accept it and submit it, and that will then register in it. And at the moment, you've got up to 7 days to edit that if you think you've done anything wrong. Okay, I'm sure in the future that may change. So you would go down to the bottom here and go continue. And can you see here, I want to accept and submit. I'm not going to accept and submit this because this is a made up soap. Okay, so you would press accept and submit and then it would be registered, and I'm going to get rid of mine. Okay, so that is how we actually put something on the portal. If you don't want to go into the details, then I hope you've found some answer to this video. I know it's not the most exciting thing in the world. I hope you found it reasonably interesting, even if it's just an interest on what we have to do in the UK, and it's pretty similar to what's done in Europe as well. Sorry, GB, Great Britain. I'm going to now go into more detail about these formulations and how we load those. So if you're not interested in that, it's going to get quite techy and spreadsheets and things like that. then great to see you, and I hope to see you in a new video soon. Let's have a look at how we put these formulations into our portal then. So, as we saw previously, we have some choices. Now my screen may look a little bit odd because I've got this sort of like little warning notification here. Changing this selection will remove all previously added ingredients. That's just because in the previous bit I just quickly bunged something in, didn't I? So you wouldn't normally have that on yours. Yours would just have that error message, as it were, missing. So let's look at each of these in turn, and hopefully it will help you decide which you can use or which you want to use, which is more appropriate to you. So the first one, this choose a predefined frame formulation. Now this is undoubtedly the easiest way to go, but I think people are nervous. People are always very nervous, I think, about doing stuff on here. They think, you know, it's going to end up with serious problems if you do it wrong. Potentially it could, but read through, see if it matches your formulation and see what you think. So the first thing you need to do is check that you think that predefined formulation meets your needs and matches your recipe. Now, if you just go into this choose a predefined frame formulation and go continue, it will then just give you a bunch of options from what you've chosen. And as you can see, I chose toilet soap before and pops that in. And you might go, well, how do I know what's in it? Okay, so let's go back. Once you know what's in it and you know you can use it, then that's fine. Now you'll find the formulations either right on the front page, or if you scroll down to the bottom bit here with the guidance, can you see here, find a frame formulation? So if you click on that, then you can go in and have a rummage around and see what you can find. So we know our soap is in skin cleansing. So you can have a look through. Now there's not formulations for everything, and the formulation that's in there may not work for you. I mean, I've searched forever to find bath bombs in here, can't find them. If anyone knows, then let me know. But anyway, what were we? Soap, toilet soap, as they call it. So let's click on that. And what that then does is that tells us what they would be expecting if you used this formulation. So if you go through and check this and it matches what's in your recipe, then there's no reason why, as far as I know, that you can't use it. So let's have a look at how we would do that. So with our frame formulation, can you see it gives us the maximum concentration? So it's saying here, you can have up to 99% of your soap as actual soap. Okay, and then there's other things. Now, whenever you're doing a formulation into the portal, as I mentioned previously, it's done on a what the product is now basis, so the saponified basis. So just because you know what goes into your soap, remember you need to know what the soap consists of when it's actually going to be put onto the market. Now, as we said, you should have a cosmetic assessment for your soaps. I can't imagine anyone's registering stuff on the portal if they haven't got a cosmetic assessment for it. But, you know, both things are a legal requirement. So you're going to need to get your assessment and match it through. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull up it's a fudged assessment. It's basically where I've taken the structure of what a recipe would look like in an assessment, but I've changed the recipe just so it's not my recipe on the screen. So I'm just going to pull that up. Okay, so I've pulled up here on this left-hand side. Essentially, in your assessment, when it comes through, you will have your formulation after saponification. So as you can see, all the names on here are like sodium, sunflowerate, the saponified versions of the oils. And your assessor will have gone through and calculated how much is left in your soap. Now, as I've said, this is not my recipe, so please don't write this down and think, oh, I'm going to use that recipe. And I've just noticed here, I've put in sodium palmate twice, so ignore that. This is just to give us an illustration. So I'm sure I added that up and it came to 100%, but I can see I've put palm oil in there twice. You know, I've just done this to give you an example of what's going on. So please don't get too fussed about what's in this recipe. It's got all the main components that you need. It's just for illustrative purposes. This is not a recipe that I would use or recommend for anyone, especially as I've put palm oil in there twice and it probably doesn't add up to 100 now. But anyway, we can still use it. So your assessor will have worked out what will be left in your soap. You can do it yourself, and certainly with some things I do actually do it myself. When I have ranges and things to do, I make it up. And what you will find is there'll be some things in there that have changed from your initial recipe. So for example, there'll be no sodium hydroxide in here, no lie, because that's been saponified out. Okay, so your water will be a lot lower than was in your soap. So your assessor will assess how much water is likely to be left in your soap after it's gone through a proper cure. In addition to that, you will then have some glycerin in your recipe. Now, you didn't add glycerin to your soap, or it's unlikely that you'd have added glycerin to your cold processed soap, but we know the saponification reaction takes those fatty acids, the oils, and it changes them into the soap, which includes a glycerin component. So that's produced through the saponification reaction. Okay, so that will then be in there as well. Otherwise, I've just got things like I have a bit of sugar in my recipe. I've popped some sodium lactate in there. And then you can see at the bottom, I've just bunged in various micas and things. Again, no specific names, I've just made them up. And some fragrance oil at the bottom. Again, just made it up. Pretty fragrance oil from Fragrance Supplier 1. Okay, so those are my ingredients in my saponified bar. Right, let's go and check that we can use our frame formulation. So my saponified oils, so my vegetable oil, etc., tallow fats, can be up to 99% of my recipe. You could go through and add all those up. They're going to come to less than 99%, aren't they? Because the entire recipe is 100%. So we're okay. That's fine. We're okay with this one. Glycerin up to 20%. Let's go and check. We can see in my recipe, the glycerin is at 8.55. So that's okay. That's within the range that I've got. Emollients and humectants. Now, did you put any emollients or extra humectants in? Like they've got an example there of propylene glycol. I didn't, but things that are actually classed as humollients. Humollients? That's a combination of an emollient and a humectant. Okay, so for me, these things are actually humectants. Sucrose, sugar, acts as a humectant in your soap, and so does sodium lactate. So I can see in total I've got 1.55%. I'm allowed up to 10% if I want to use this formula. So cool, they're all in there. Then notice here we've got this extra bit here of oils. 5% of oils. And you might be thinking, well, hang on a minute, I've had my oils up here. The difference between the two is these top ones here are your saponified oils. And these ones here are extra oils. So this would be potentially taking account of your superfat. So if you have more than a 5% superfat, you technically couldn't use this formulation. So if you superfat your soap, maybe it's a coconut oil soap and you put in a 20% superfat, you wouldn't be using this. Quite often when people do hot process, they may add in some extra oil at the end for the superfat. So again, within that 5%, and you're cool, you're all right. What else have we got? Some perfume, so that's our fragrance there. So our parfum 5%, and if we check there, well, we know in the UK we're only allowed to use 3% anyway. So as you can see here, by the time it's all saponified and everything else is mucked around with, that comes to 2.72. That's still in line. Then all our colorants. So here are all my colorants here. My micas, my charcoal powder, my everything that I've got in here. Then they're always going to be well below 5%. You would never have 5% colouring. You might argue that charcoal is not really a colourant. We can see where we could check that a little bit further down to see if it would still fit if you didn't want to class that as a colourant, even though we're using it as a colourant. Okay, colourants are fine. Titanium dioxide, less than 2%. I'm not using, yes I am, I've got 2% TD there, so that's fine. Bear in mind you've always got little bits of TD in most of these micas as well, haven't you? But it's still going to be well below 2%. Cationic polymers. I don't know what they are. I did Google it. You get lots of techie pictures and that coming in. I'm pretty sure we haven't got any of those in the soaps. And then additional ingredients. Let me just scroll that up. For example, plant extract. So therefore, if you thought, well, I don't think charcoal powder is really a colorant as such, well, you could say, well, it's a plant extract, isn't it? And that would work as well. It is a plant extract, and I've got less than 2% in my soap. And then last of all, preservatives, antimicrobials, antioxidants, chelating agents. So maybe if you add some citric acid to your soap, I haven't got it in my recipe here, but maybe if you do, as long as it's under 1% of your final formulation, then that's fine. And then your water, that's not up to 100%. That's not sort of like, you could have 70% water. That would be difficult to have a solid bar of soap, wouldn't it? That's basically saying that would be sort of the balancing figure to take it to 100%. So there's always going to be some water in there. You know, your solid bar of soap still has water, otherwise it would just be a powdery dust in there. So can you see with that, with this key basic recipe here, I meet this recipe. So if I wanted to, I can, and I do often, because my formulas do tend to meet this frame formulation. I can literally go in and go, how will you provide the product information? I know my soap meets this, so I don't bother uploading any sorts of horrible complicated stuff. I just tick that and go continue. Choose my soap for my toilet soap. And then the only other consideration I would have from that is whether there's any of those things that I need to tell the NPIS about. So if my soap had an essential oil in it, I would then still fill this section in that it's got, 3% of peppermint essential oil or whatever in there, and that would do it. Okay, so if you can do the frame formulation, I would do it as much as you possibly can. And it was from me starting to use a frame formulation with mine that when I started doing my spreadsheets and things like that for exact concentrations, I started to be a little less picky. I used to list every single tiny weeny number and everything in there. But when you think about that frame formulation, notice your frame formulation basically said colorants. So I must admit, sometimes I do list all my individual colorants out. Sometimes, if I'm a little bit of a rush, I put colorants and then the range that the colorants can go in. The advantage of doing that is once you've worked out your own formulations, and I'll show you how to do it in a minute, if you've gone colorants up to, let's say, 3% or whatever, then every time you change your mica, if you have the ability to do that within your assessment, bear in mind, then you haven't got to reinvent the wheel. Okay, so there's those frame formulations done. Paul, you might want to stop and have a cup of tea now and come back to this later. Let's have a look now at some of the other ways we have to upload our formulations. A lot more work. Now, these first ones are a lot more work. Huge amounts of work, and something I wouldn't never do. You might find these ones at the bottoms, these CSV files, are a headache to get started, but once you got them, they're almost as quick as doing the predefined frame formulation. So, do you want to enter your ingredients and the exact concentrations manually? Okay, so let's say we're going to do that. I'm going to again bring up my fake recipe. So I've got my made up recipe. Again, we know it doesn't balance, so I'm not going to go and type all this in anyway, because you will have all walked away by line 3. So we're just going to do it very briefly. So again, you need the recipe from your assessor unless you're able yourself to calculate all those figures yourself. So we're going to enter the ingredients and their exact concentrations manually. Okay, and this is why people hate putting things on the portal. Right, let's continue. So add the ingredients. You have to add every ingredient separately. So what I've done is, you can see I've really typed in. So I would start with sodium sunflowerate. I've just done that one. So each time, sodium sunflowerate, sodium cocoate. So you literally copy it in. Sodium cocoate. I want 24.97% because that's the amount that's in my formula. I know this here says max weight, but this isn't a range. This is your assessor telling you this is what's actually in here. What is the CAS number? Okay, so I don't bother with that. It tells me it's optional. So I must admit, I'm not going to go hunting around trying to find CAS numbers and all that sort of stuff if I don't need to put them in. It's basically coconut oil going in there. So I'm just going to leave it. Does the NPIS need to be notified about this ingredient? So remember what we said before? We saw that list, didn't we, of things like essential oils and that they need to know about. Cocoa butter, coconut oil, palm oil, avocado oil. The National Poisons Centre does not need to know about them. I've seen quite a bit of advice saying to people, we don't know, we don't understand this, so we're always going to tick this box and tell them they need to know about that. I think that's bad practice. I know people are covering their backs trying to do that, but too much information is not useful. You know, saying to someone, you know, imagine your product has potentially caused a problem and suddenly you're telling them that everything in there is potentially dangerous, that the national poisons people need to know about, when it's stuff that's not poisonous. That's just overloading the database with incorrect information. So only put in the stuff there that they need to know about, like the things on that list. So mainly for us, it's going to be things like any essential oils. So I'm going to say, no, don't need to know about that. And then I just add in another ingredient. Okay, so there's ingredient 1. Then you put in another one. Sodium palmate. For me, that's 12.98%. Ignore the fact that I've got it in twice. I'm not going to put in a CAS number because it's optional. Again, NPIS don't need to know about it. So therefore, I could then add another ingredient. So you're going to go all the way through here, adding things in. Now, if I was going to use this method, and I don't, what I would suggest you do, when you get down to things like your micas and that, you obviously want to potentially put in your mica name. I would put in maybe the CI numbers as well. Here's where I take a shortcut, and someone in the comments, if you know I'm technically wrong on this, then please feel free to say. I've tried so hard to find information about how to do this correctly. Remember that frame formulation? It said colorants 5%. So I must admit, I kind of take the view of just bunging in here colorants like they would on the frame formulation. Because why, if we're allowed to enter a frame formulation that just say colorants, why when we put in our exact one do we then list out every single individual little colorant? So I would put in colorants. I would list my titanium dioxide separately because on the frame formulation it does that. So I would then just do an example that did colorants like that. And I would add all those colorants up and put in whatever percentage they are. Let's say that's 3.6%. Okay, and the poisons people don't need to know about that. Okay, so that's how I do it. And you go through all the way through it. So you can imagine if you've got a lot of soaps to load up, remember every single different soap you make has to be loaded up individually. Then you're going to have to do this each time. Okay, so that's loading up our manual exact formulations. If you were going to do it for a range of formulations, so let me go back. Exactly the same sort of thing, so in their concentration ranges, apart from as you add them now, just bung in something that I've got, can you see you put in the minimum and the maximum that would be in your recipe here? And we'll talk about ranges a little bit more in a minute when we look at the spreadsheets and things. Okay, so that's entering stuff manually. Let's now get on to the CSV. So this is what I tend to use. If I'm not doing a frame formulation, I use the CSV method. Let's deal with the CSV files now. I think this is the area that people are a little bit scared of, but to be honest, once you've got it sorted, it's one of the easiest ways that you can do your formulations if there's not a specific frame formulation for you. Because although you may find setting up the initial file a little bit tricky, once you've got it, then you can just keep uploading it. And I know people might say, well, it's easy to just type in the exact concentrations or the ranges manually, but you have to type in every single ingredient every single time you upload a formula onto the portal, where here the template you can just keep reusing as long as you make sure it's accurate each time. Right, let's have a look then. So upload a CSV file for the ingredients and their exact concentrations. So same as we did before, it's just another way of getting that information that we've already seen onto this portal. Now I think sometimes people are a little bit worried about what on earth is a CSV file. A CSV file is just like if you use spreadsheets, if you use Excel and you have a spreadsheet. I must admit, I'm sorry, I'm not familiar with how Apple products work and CSV files, but I'm sure it's a similar sort of thing, but I can't give advice on that. I only use Excel, I'm afraid. What you can do is just tick on that, upload your CSV file, and if you press continue, what you can do, can you see this little link here? This will just tell you more about your CSV file, but somewhere where we scroll down, can you see there's like a little download here? So what you can do is it will actually download a template for you, and it goes into more detail about how to create this file. It does make it seem a little bit complicated. It's fairly straightforward, but literally just clicking on there will download a template. So let's have a look at how we would do that then. I'm going to pull up my made up recipe on a CSV file. I filled mine all in just so it saves you having to just watch it. This is just me in Excel, and you could just open this up in a normal Excel spreadsheet. Don't worry about CSV or anything at the moment, just do it in a normal Excel spreadsheet. And can you see all I've done is, as we did before, I've popped in that made up recipe, the sodium sunflower rate, the cocoa rate. I've literally copied it off of the assessment, and I've popped in the percentages because this is exact. I've changed the recipe a little bit just because I want you to show you how things work. I've added in some lavender essential oil, and I've just popped in some colorants at the bottom. Remember what I said previously, I tend to put in my colorants together nowadays. If that's wrong, I just think it just follows what the frame formulations do, so I'm going to do that. So first column should be nice and straightforward. Second column is the percentages, again copying off your assessment. Third column I don't bother with because it's optional. If you want to fill that in, you can do that. And then the fourth column, does the NPIS need to know about it? Now, when you download the template, that's basically what you get. It's just the headings. That's all the template is, and you fill it in. So let's put my figures back in. Right, the last column. If something doesn't need to be reported to the NPIS, you need to type in there false. Capital, I don't know if not capital letters, lowercase letters, that's the word, isn't it? Works. It has capital letters in their template. Their template does have a first line filled in, which you need to delete. So for everything apart from stuff you need to report, you need to write in as false, and then anything that needs to be reported, so say like an essential oil, you would write in true. So once you've done that, you do need to save that. So if I just bring up my save dialog, save as, and this is where you can change it. If you've got an Excel spreadsheet, you just need to make sure when you do save as, you pick out this CSV, delimited. Okay, that's what you want to save it at. So you save it as that to wherever you want to save it. Okay, so now we're back onto the portal page. I'm going to upload my CSV file for ingredients and their exact concentrations. So I'm going to continue for that. I'm then going to choose my file on the next page. Just from the wherever I saved it. Now that's called Portal Exact Template. I would obviously given it the name of the actual formula that I would have used. So then if you continue, this is where potentially you could get an error message. You get error messages if you've left a line out, you know, if you've got a line where you've put an ingredient and you haven't put a percentage next to it. But here, it's all good, then that's great. So we can now continue. The task has been completed. And when we do that, if we now look at our accept and submit page, if you go down to the bottom, can you see what it's done? This is what it would look like if you entered everything in manually. Can you see, because you've used that file, it's populated all of the amounts for us. Okay? And notice, look, it did the sodium, sunflowerate, the cocoate, and all that sort of stuff in there. And then look, because we did that true and false in the last column, we've got the bits that the National Poisons people need to know about. And it has told us we had some lavender essential oil in there at 2.23%, and that's done that for us. That's what that sheet would look like if you'd entered it manually, but obviously doing the CSV file, it populates those for you. Okay, so there's your CSV file. The last thing I'm going to do is CSV with ranges. Sorry if you've lost the will to live a little bit. Maybe have a break and another cup of tea if you need one. But this should be the last area that we need to look at. Or if you've no intention of doing ranges, then maybe go and get yourself a nice cup of tea and a piece of cake now. Right, let's do some ranges. Now, if you have an assessment with some flexibility, that is brilliant for making your product, because you can change things up a little bit without having to get a new assessment for every single item that you want to make. So these more flexible assessments are great. Now, if you've bought a flexi package from a supplier where you use their products and everything, they will typically provide you with the ranges that you need. However, if you've got a flexible package where they don't do that, so for example, if you've got a cold process flexible package, then you're going to need to work out those ranges yourself. So a little bit harder work on the admin side of it, but so much more flexibility on the making side of it. So it's quite likely, again, I've got my fake recipe here, that when you get a formulation that's got some variability and some flexibility to it, what will happen is in your assessment you will get your final formulation, and what they will typically provide you with is the final formulation of your base. So as you can see here on the screen, I've got that made up recipe, and it's just literally the soap base. So the oils after they've been saponified, the glycerin that's come out of that, the sugar. I've not popped sodium lactate in this bit, in this one here, but that's the base recipe. And then what you will be given separately is the options. So for example, you can add some colorant and they'll give you the rules. You can have up to 5%. You'd never need 5%. So they'll tell you all the colors that you've chosen in there. And then also potentially all the fragrances that you've chosen in there. So I've just done mine in as fragrance 1 from supplier 1, etc, etc. So you can see we can have 3%, and they'll tell you whether you can combine them or whatever. So you can see in my assessment here, for their fragrance oils, they can't be combined. Typically, if you have essential oils, you may be allowed to combine them, but that's a different thing. So, and then what if you've got some additional ingredients? So maybe in some soaps, perhaps you want to add some citric acid or something. You may have the options for that. So whatever's going on in your flexible recipe. The problem is now you've got to combine this whole kit and caboodle into something you can put on the portal. So there's 2 ways you can do it. You can either, every time you make a soap with your flexible assessment, you can look at every single item that you've used and put that into an exact CSV. Now, if you use SoapMaker 3, you can print out the recipe, as it were, that you've used as a one of those funny little CSV note files or something, and do it from there. I've never been able to get that to work for me, but maybe if you do that, then that's great. I do it through a spreadsheet and turn it into a CSV file. So what I do is I start with my base. So with my base, I'm not going to necessarily do it all showing 2 bits on the screen. I'm just going to give you a quick overview of how I do it. So if I go into a spreadsheet that I would use, so what I've got here in my spreadsheet is my template, and again you would download this from the portal website. You'd go into I'm going to have a range and download the template like we did with the exact one, but just do it for the ranges. And all I've done here is I've popped in my fake recipe. So again, you do have to put it in once and then copy it over here. And what I've done here, and I'm not guaranteeing those figures are exactly the same on that fake assessment that I showed you, is I pop in all the figures of that base formulation into just a little calculation area. I total them up at the bottom just to make sure they're showing at 100%. So in theory, what this is this is the idea that if I put no fragrance oil and no colorants in, this would just be the base that they gave me in my assessment. But the issue is that I know that I'm allowed up to 3% fragrance oil. So I'm going to put the maximum fragrance I would put in there is 3. Now remember, this is ranges, so I'm going to put in the maximum. And the colorants, the maximum they told me, I think they said was 5, wasn't it? I'd never put in 5, but that's what's allowed in my assessment, so I'm going to put that in. Why would I limit this for any restrictions? So what we've now got is a way that we can generate what will be the correct amounts. So what we need to do is we need to change these percentages. So I go and grab the first figures that I had and I just copy them over into my next column. But what I now do is I now add those back up again. Okay, if you're not familiar with spreadsheets, I'm not going to go how you do all the formulas and everything. I'm presuming you've got a knowledge of spreadsheets. So however you want to total those up is fine. So you can see now with this, sorry, I'm poking it with my finger and you can't see that. With this column, this is the original recipe. And I've added some stuff onto it. So I'm quite happy to just copy what I had originally and then say, in addition to that recipe that I've got, I'm going to add the amounts on. I know sometimes people struggle with this and go, yeah, but that's now not 32%. I'm just taking the view that if I was making 100 grams of recipe, I would still put in 32.44 or still have 32.44 grams of sunflower oil. It's just that that will now be a smaller proportion of the overall recipe. So I now just recalculate these percentages. So I'm just going to do a formula. So I'm going to say that equals 32.44. Divide that by the total, and I want to times it by 100, or you can just do as a percent. So we can now see, by the time I've got the maximum of the fragrance oil and the colorants in, that would now give me this final. Okay, so let's just do that for one more. So my coconut oil, I'm going to say, so this equals, put in my bracket, my coconut oil ingredient, divide that by the total recipe, and then I can times that by 100. And you can see that's now 23.8%. So as a have I done this right type sense check, you would expect the figures in this column to be lower than the figures in these columns because you're now revising them on a whole recipe. So once you've done that, you can then just bring that formula down into your other sections. I'm just going to quickly do that. I'm just going to make those decimals a bit smaller, annoying being that big. And that's my final. So now we need to fill in our minimum and maximum columns for our CSV file. So we're going to be using, I'm just going to hide that column a bit so we don't accidentally use it. Right, just took it out. So we either want the original figures, so these are the figures that would be the correct percentages if we had no other additives, and these are the figures that we have if we have additives in, so like the micas and the fragrance. And what you need to do is in your minimum and maximum columns is you always want to put the big figure in the maximum and the small figure in the minimum. Now essentially you can do this fairly quickly because it will all follow the same pattern. So for example here, your oils, it's only when you get down to there, in the original column, they will all be the highest amounts because all you had in there, wasn't it? The oils, the glycerin, you had nothing else. So those are the biggest figures. So we can copy those and pop those in our maximum columns. And these ones can go in our minimum columns. Let's just deal with the last two things, the fragrance oil and the colorants. And that's just where you need to be a little bit careful, but just follow the rule. Put the small figure in the minimum column and the big figure in the maximum column. So the lowest amount of fragrance and colorants we're going to have is 0. And the highest amount is those two. Okay. And that's those done. Now, it's very tempting to try and add this up to see if it comes to 100%. And then get worried that you've done something wrong. It won't come to 100% with those. Okay, so don't worry about it. Because remember, what we're saying is, what is the minimum that we would use? So that's not, you could never have the minimum coming to 100% because it's not going to be a complete recipe, is it? So you'd never have that minimum, and you'd always going to have the maximum coming to over 100% because this is, what is the maximum? You're never going to max out on everything. You physically can't max out of it and get those percentages. So don't worry about that if that doesn't look right there. So there's everything done. The only other thing to tell you about ranges is, let's imagine that this perfume, okay, so our fragrance oil was actually essential oil. Okay, so let's imagine that was a lavender essential oil. I know I should be typing in there lavender and angustifolia, blah, blah, blah. I can't be bothered. We've been doing this long enough, haven't we? So let's imagine that was a lavender essential oil. We know essential oils have to be reported to NPIS. So we change that false to a true. And we try and spell it correctly as well. And we need to get rid of any surplus. So I start with everything populated as false and then change if necessary. Now, if you have something that the NPIS need to know about, you cannot do a range. So therefore, you have to take your 2.78 and put it into the exact column. And then take it out of these columns. If you try and load it with those columns in there, then it will just tell you just made an error. Okay, so there's that done. Now, you might want to save that like that as a file with calculations. You know, maybe you think, oh, I don't want to just delete that. When you upload it onto the portal, you need to get rid of this. It doesn't want anything else in there than its figures. So clean it up. Get rid of it. Okay, if that makes you nervous, save it as a whatever file with calculations and then save it again as a CSV file with your portal amounts. So I'm just going to save mine. Okay, let's load this last file up. So we're now going to give our product information using a CSV file with their ranges. And as I said, this is useful when you've got flexibility, because once you've loaded this once, you can keep using this CSV file every time you use that flexible assessment. You can just use the same file up. Check your fragrance oil each time, you know, make sure there's nothing that you need to report, you know, your essential oil, etc. Right, so let's go in. Choose the ingredient file. So I'm going to choose my file. Portal ranges, make sure you pick up your CSV file. Now, I haven't checked my headers with this, so I might get an error message. I thought this would happen, but I thought I would leave it in because I found it something that happens really commonly. So I thought I would leave it in just so I show you how I fix it. It says the header row must be included in the selected files. I'm not really sure why that happens, but the way I found to fix it is go back into the file that you've got. Okay, so that's what we were just dealing with. And then what I do is I've always got the basic template saved. So this is the template that I downloaded from the website. I never muck around with this one, you know, I copy it and use a different one, you know. So this is the original. What I found is if you just go into this and copy that very first row and then just paste it. You can see it doesn't seem to do anything different. And let's save that. It probably won't work now, will it? Okay, so you can see by just either cutting the headers and putting it into your file, or taking your ingredients and everything and putting it into the template again, it seems to fix it. I don't know why it has a problem, you know, anytime you make any changes, but that was something that I found does happen, and that was one way I solved it. So as you can see here, I've done it successfully apparently, so I can then just continue and finish this off. And if we look at my accept and review page, can you see it's now done it in ranges? It's said my sunflower oil will be somewhere between 30 and 32%, and everything's in there. And also it's then said lavender essential oil is at 2.78. Now, I was just lazy, wasn't I? I didn't bother typing in the full inky name. You would need the full inky name in there. I was just being a little bit lazy with that. Okay, so that's put that in there for you with all your ranges. And as I said, the useful thing with that is, let's imagine you just had a fragrance oil, so you wouldn't need that exact bit there. You could just keep reusing this spreadsheet every single time that you put this in. I'm just going to cancel this because I don't want that product in there, and get rid of it. Okay, so that's where I'm going to leave that. I know it wasn't the most exciting video in the world, but it is something I've been asked for a lot of times, and I've kind of put off doing the video. So maybe you watched it just out of interest to see what we have to do in Great Britain with our registering our items on the portal. And we have to do that for every single type of cosmetic product that we make, so bath bombs and all of that sort of stuff. And anytime you change something, we have to re-upload. So just a quick summary of the way I tend to do it option wise. First of all, when I've got the choice of what to do for my formulations, if the frame formulation fits for a product, I'll use the frame formulation, because that's a click one button and you're done, and that's great. Failing that, I never, if I'm literally got one product that I'm only ever going to make once, and it's going to have exactly the same formulation every time, so I'm only going to ever have to load it once onto the portal, I would then possibly put the amounts in manually. But I would always opt for doing the CSV file. Once you've got those CSV files done, you've got them, and they're very easy to upload or just tweak for another product that's maybe a little bit different and upload them again. And again, if you've got a flexible product, by uploading using ranges, then you can just use that spreadsheet again and again and again. Obviously with the caveat, if you use something like essential oils, you just need to be careful to tweak for that exact bit on notifying the National Poisons people. I know it's not NPP, but I prefer to call them the National Poisons people for that exact concentration range. So I hope you found that useful, and if you have, it'd be great if you gave me a thumbs up. I'm sorry it's not the most exciting thing in the world, but as I said, I get asked so many times about the portal. If you'd like to see what I'm doing in the future and some things that I'm making, why not subscribe to my channel? Thanks for watching everyone. Happy soaping!